Welcome to So-Called Discoveries, where we discuss stories, knowledge, and insights from somewhere and try to learn something. My name is Anthony Ozzie. In today's episode, we are discussing the principles of wealth and leverage in the modern economy, specifically the differences between wealth and money, and the various forms of leverage that one can apply to multiply their decisions and judgment in the modern economy. And those forms of leverage are labor, capital, media, and code. The ideas that we're discussing today come from the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which you can find information on in the show notes, or you can Google Naval Ravikant or Navalmanac. Naval is a successful serial entrepreneur. He is probably most known for starting the company AngelList, and since then he has gotten into investing and a number of other things. He is a very unique voice in the space of the internet and podcasts and YouTube and all different forms of media. I really appreciate his thoughtfulness and his unique perspective and his ability to explain things simply and clearly. If you want to learn more about him, there's plenty of information that you can look up online or again, check the show notes. Without further ado, let's get into it. Firstly, let's define wealth, money, and status. Wealth is assets that earn without active work, assets that can earn while you sleep, and we'll discuss them in greater detail. Money is how we transfer wealth and time. You can think of it as social credits. It allows you to credit or debit other people's time. And basically, it's when you create value for society through some sort of work, they give you money. And then status is your place in the social hierarchy. We're not going to focus too much on status today, but I define these three things because Naval says it's important to understand the differences between them, distinguish between wealth, money, and status, and that we should really be seeking wealth. That's what we really need to be going after, and that we should seek wealth over money and status. So again, just to highlight the differences between money and wealth in particular, money is compensation that you receive for work that was done in the past that created value for society. Wealth is owning a business or an asset that earns money while you sleep, that earns money without you having to actively spend your time working to earn that money. An example of this is you might own a factory. Of course, it requires time and money to get to the place where you own the factory, but once you own that factory, it is an asset that earns money without you actually having to actively spend your time working. You can own a factory, you can own a mobile app, you can own a blog, you can have an investment in a company either through the public market or through private equity. Even your savings account, money within your savings account at the bank is an asset because although it's minimal, you are receiving returns. It just sits there and the money grows. A house can even be an asset that earns you money if you rent it out on Airbnb, for example. So that's what Naval really means when he talks about wealth. He's talking about something that you own that earns you money without you having to spend your time actively doing whatever it is the nature of getting that money is. Now, I want to just highlight a few points around the conversation of how to get rich or how to build wealth or create wealth. And again, this is probably for some people, this is raising alarm bells. This seems like a get rich quick scheme. It's not. There's no get rich quick schemes here. He just gives advice. And I should have mentioned this at the top, but everything that I'm discussing now, like I said, that comes from the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, it's out there for free. He has it on his website completely free. It's a PDF version. It's essentially a full book. It's over 200 pages. And it's a completely free resource. Everything that he talks about when it comes to building wealth and how to get rich for yourself and improve your own situation when it comes to that type of stuff, he doesn't sell any products or courses or anything like that. All this is out there for free. And he actually says there's no such thing as a get rich quick scheme. Those are only somebody else getting rich off of you. So when Naval talks about how to get rich or how to build wealth, what he's really talking about and what most of us are really talking about is how to get financial freedom. So how to get to the point where we don't have to work. We only work because we want to. Not everybody has that goal, but if that is your goal, it's important to understand that you are never going to get there by renting out your time. You must own equity. You must own a piece of a business. You are never going to earn enough purely through getting a paycheck to be financially free. You have to own something. You have to own equity. You have to own a piece of a business, at least according to Naval. Another important thing that you can do is to give society what it wants, but does not yet know how to get at scale. He also says that you need to play long-term games with long-term people, and that all returns in life, whether it's wealth, relationship, or knowledge, all returns come from compound interest. And that we should partner with people that are highly intelligent, highly energetic, and most importantly, of high integrity. We should not partner with cynics or pessimists. They have self-fulfilling beliefs. Another important thing he says is that learn to sell and learn to build. If you can do both of those things, you will be unstoppable. And he says, work as hard as you can. Although who you work with and what you work on are far more important than how hard you work. He says, become the best in the world at what you do. And redefine what it is that you do until that becomes true. I really like that one. Finally, he says, if we apply specific knowledge with leverage, then eventually we will get what we deserve. And we are going to talk about specific knowledge and leverage later in the episode. But the final point I'll leave you here on these just series of little pieces of advice is that he says, once you're finally wealthy, you'll realize that it actually wasn't the thing that you were seeking in the first place. He doesn't really elaborate much on that. He says that's for another day. It's probably from another part of the book, but I thought that was interesting to share. Before we get into building specific knowledge, how to find and build specific knowledge, I want to talk about a concept that Naval says is called productizing yourself. If we break down these two words, productize and yourself, productize is about having some sort of specific knowledge and then using some sort of leverage to get something out of that specific knowledge, put it into some sort of a product format. And then yourself is about the uniqueness that comes from you and the accountability of putting your name on something. And there's also some specific knowledge built into yourself as well with your experiences and your background. And he says that if your long-term goal is to be wealthy, then you must be authentic and project yourself in whatever it is that you do. In other words, productize yourself. And then once you do that, you scale it. And you scale that using one of the forms of leverage which we're going to get into, which I said again were labor, capital, media, and code. But before we do that, we're going to talk about specific knowledge. An example of specific knowledge are sales skills. If you think about it, you can imagine someone who's a natural salesman. That is a thing. It's somebody who you just know by spending time with them, you can just tell that they get sales. They are good at sales. They know how to sell somebody something, and it doesn't really matter so much what it is that they're trying to sell. They have the skills. That is a form of specific knowledge. And they learned that somewhere. But they did not learn that in a classroom. You don't get a natural salesman out of a classroom environment. You get it from some unique, strange combination of the person's DNA and their upbringing and all the things that they've run into in their life and their childhood, as well as their response to it and how they reacted to it. It's baked into their personality and their identity, and they figured out a way to hone it. that person who's a natural salesman who finds themselves ending up in sales and doing well, nobody can really compete with that person if they are being authentic, if they're being true to themselves. And this applies to not just sales, this applies to anybody. No one can compete with you on being you. The absolute best that anyone competing with you on being you can hope for is to be second best. So it's about being true and being authentic. And the internet nowadays enables us to have more opportunities from being ourselves and being true and authentic, because we can find our audience online if for example, one of the leverages that you're using is media or code. Some other examples of specific knowledge is maybe somebody who has a natural affinity for musical talent. Maybe they could pick up any instrument as a child and just seems like they can play. Or someone who had some sort of an obsessive personality where you can dive in and remember things really quickly. Or maybe when you were a kid you were really into science fiction. That probably means you're pretty good at absorbing knowledge and remembering information. If you were really into gossip when you were younger and digging into what was going on with your friends and their social circles, maybe you might be a natural journalist. The point is that when we discover our natural affinity for things and we work to hone those skills and use them to develop specific knowledge, we are escaping competition through authenticity. When we compete with people, it's often because we're copying them. If what you're building or marketing is intuitively an extension of who you are, no one can compete with you. One of the most important skills, according to Naval, for getting rich and developing specific knowledge is being a perpetual learner. We have to know how to learn anything that it is that we want to learn or need to learn. The old model of the workforce was you go to school for a certain number of years, many years, you get your degree, and then you work as a professional for many decades based off of that. The new model, the modern economy, requires us to come up to speed with a new profession within several months. And then a few years later, 4 or 5 years later, that profession becomes obsolete. But if you're able to come up to speed within 9 months, and you have about 3 productive years before it becomes obsolete, you can do very well for yourself. So it's much more important today to be able to become an expert in a new field in several months to a year than it is to have studied the right thing some long time ago and having that carry you throughout your career. And so because we need to be perpetual learners, infinite learners, always being able to learn things within a relatively short period of time and then be effective within that space, it's highly important that we understand the foundations of whatever it is that we learn. It's even more important than diving deeply into a topic is understanding the foundations. Another way of thinking about this is first principles thinking. So that is finding and developing specific knowledge. Now, once we've done that, we're going to get to the thing we've been leading up to, which is leverage. We live in an age of infinite leverage today. The economic reward for genuine intellectual curiosity has never been higher. That means pursuing your genuine, true interests. The things that feel like play, that come easier to you than other people. Following your genuine intellectual curiosity is a better foundation for your career than trying to figure out whatever it is the high-paying job and making the most money right now. If you can be trained to do something, other people can be trained that can replace you. Or a computer could be trained to replace you. When you have specific knowledge that you alone, or maybe just a small set of people have, that generally tends to come from your true passions, your curiosities, your interests. Because it's something that you've been doing over time and that you've continued to learn and progress throughout and iterate over. Once you get that specific knowledge and you've developed it over time, if you want to convert that into wealth fortune? You need leverage. In business, there are 4 forms of leverage that Naval discusses. The first is labor, the second is capital, the third is media, and the fourth is code. And media and code are basically combined into a single category of products with no marginal cost of replication. We'll drill into that definition in a little bit. But for now, just keep in mind labor, capital, media, code. Those are the 4 types of leverage in business. Leverage is a force multiplier for your judgment. Think about it. It makes sense. If you make a decision and you have other people working for you, i.e. labor, then the impact of your decision is greater. Same thing if you have capital, i.e. other people's money. You can deploy those resources greater than if you didn't have that capital. So when you have leverage, it multiplies the weight and the impact and the force of your judgment, whether that's good judgment or bad judgment. Another important concept is permissioned versus permissionless leverage. Labor and capital are forms of permissioned leverage. Everyone is trying to raise money. Everyone is trying to hire people. Somebody has to give you what you want. Somebody has to give you money. Somebody has to give you their labor. You can't inherently just do it on your own. You need other people. You need other people's permission. Then there's permissionless leverage, where media and code come into play. And this is where most of the new rich of the modern economy come from. And these are products that work while you sleep. Software, books, blogs, videos, podcasts, tweets. They don't require anybody's permission. You can just build them or write them or publish them, whatever it is. And then they replicate on their own. They distribute on their own. You don't have to do any of the work. They're out there, and various platforms and algorithms and distribution systems are doing the work for you. Now, labor is the oldest and most competitive form of leverage. And when I say most competitive, it means everybody's trying to hire somebody. And Naval argues that of the 4, labor, capital, code, media, labor is actually the worst when it comes to the modern world. And that's, again, of the 4, it's the worst. And that's because managing people is messy, and it requires a lot of leadership skills and a lot of work and a lot of time itself. Then there's capital, in which you're raising money from other people and then applying your specific knowledge with accountability, and then your results hopefully show your good judgment. Capital multiplies decisions like all forms of leverage, but it multiplies it with money. You can make a decision and then use other people's money to enact that decision. And capital scales very well. If you are good at managing capital, then you can increase the amount of capital that you manage much easier than somebody who is good at managing labor can increase the amount of labor that they manage. Capital scales very, very well. Then we get to the new rich, the new money, and that's code and media, or in other words, we can say products with no marginal cost of replication. You build it once, and then replicating it is essentially free. It's the brand new, most democratic, permissionless form of leverage in the economy. Books, media, movies, code, tweets, podcast, music, whatever it is. Code is probably the most powerful, according to Naval. But it started with the printing press. Then it got to broadcast media. And now it's evolved to internet and code. It allows you to multiply your efforts without requiring anyone else's labor or anyone else's capital. Think about someone who wants to communicate their ideas to the masses. And they're comparing a podcast versus doing a series of lectures in person. With a podcast, you record it once. You record the lecture once. And then it's replicated over and over and over again an infinite amount of times and can be distributed all over the place, and you're going to reach many people. versus if you do a series of lectures, which, maybe they provide certain value that the podcast won't, but nonetheless, the lecture is going to require you, every single lecture is going to require a large amount of time from you. You have to show up, you have to travel, you have to spend the amount of time that it takes before, during, and after the lecture. And you have to spend the energy doing it. So that's the difference. That's where leverage can come in. And I mentioned this a couple of times, but Naval says that the new rich, people like Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, or in media, Joe Rogan, Mr. Beast, these types of people, the new rich, they pretty much all came from this form of leverage, products with no marginal cost of replication. These types of products allow us to optimize for our independence rather than our pay. We become accountable for our output rather than our input. Because of this, a leveraged worker can highly outproduce a non-leveraged worker. With leverage, our judgment is multiplied. And our judgment becomes, therefore, more important than the amount of time or effort that we put into something. Think about one really good software engineer who uses leverage in the sense that they are able to use their specific knowledge and figure out that there is a very simple program, a very simple piece of code that is going to save a company millions of dollars. They write that program, and they deploy it, and it works. And you compare that to a team of engineers, maybe 10 engineers, who are all working much harder, longer hours and grinding away, using the wrong models, trying to solve the wrong problems, building the wrong products, coming up with the wrong designs. But they're working hard, they're working fast, but they are not able to beat the software engineer who on his own just figured out that he just needed to make this simple change here, come up with this simple program, and then sit back and let the army of robots, let the army of code do the work. So leverage allows us to control our time and be tracked on our outputs rather than our inputs. Naval gives us a quote from Archimedes that says, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I will move the earth." And I think that is a good place to wrap up for today. Now, this by no means has been a full discussion of the ideas talked about in the Almanac of Naval, which I mentioned at the top. This was just me pulling out a few of the concepts that I wanted to highlight, such as wealth and the various forms of leverage. There are many other aspects that you'll find in that free PDF, which again, I will link to in the show notes. If you enjoyed this content and you want to hear more from Naval Ravikant and some of his ideas, let me know. There is a link in the show notes that you can use to connect with me, send me an email, get in touch on social, whatever it is. Also, if you enjoyed this content, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen and enable the notifications if that's your thing, so you know when a new episode comes out. Also, if you have not done so already, you can rate the podcast up to 5 stars. I hope the information in today's episode has been useful, beneficial, or otherwise not a waste of time for you. And at the very least, I hope that you have learned something. Thank you very much, and goodbye.